So, welcome back for part three of Lakeshore Legal Aid's Education Advocacy Series. My name is Courtney Marshall. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for Lakeshore, and I will be your moderator this afternoon. Whether you're returning from parts one and two of this series or new here, welcome. We're so glad to have you. In part three of our series today, we will be talking about effective communication and advocacy in special education. And our returning presenters, Antoinette Williams-Dial, staff attorney with Lakeshore's Counsel and Advocacy Law Line, and Susan Marquardt, supervising attorney with our Counsel and Advocacy Law Line, are excited to welcome a special guest joining their conversation today. Kalila Montgomery is one of two advocates at the ARC Northwest Wayne County and has been in this role for 2 years. She was a parent mentor with Michigan Alliance for Families for 3 years prior to her current position. As an advocate, Kalila supports students as well as individuals receiving community mental health services. Kalila has professional and personal experience supporting families and students with unique abilities. She advocates alongside families to ensure free and appropriate education and has a passion for empowering families to advocate for themselves. Welcome, Kalila. We are so happy to have you. The presentation this afternoon will run about 30 to 40 minutes, followed by a question and answer period. If you have a question for our presenters or for our guest, please put it in the chat and we'll address it during that time. And with that, I will turn it over to our presenters and guests, Antoinette, Susan, and Kalila.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for our third installment in our Education Advocacy Facebook Live series. Susan and I are very excited to welcome Kalila here with us today. Thank you for agreeing to join us for this conversation on effective communication in special education. We really appreciate you being here with us today. Can you take a moment to talk about your background and who the ARC is and what you do for the community?
Sure. As you all stated, I'm an advocate with the ARC, one of two advocates there. I'm also a mom. I have 3 children. I have a 10-year-old daughter, and I also have 20-year-old twin sons. They will be turning 21 in a couple of weeks, and both of my sons have gone through the special education process. So beginning kindergarten, they had their first IEP. Both of my sons are on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, complete opposite ends of the spectrum, so they keep me pretty busy. They have gone all the way through school. One of my sons is actually still receiving special education services through the age of 26. My other son graduated with a diploma and is kind of navigating adult life right now. So we are in a whole new field right now that's new to all of us, actually. And that's kind of it. The ARC Northwest of Wayne County, we are an advocacy agency. We are located in Canton, Michigan. We offer community support. We support individuals receiving community mental health as well as those receiving or possibly should be receiving special education services in the school system. There at our agency, we offer a lot of community events. We're open to the public. We have some holiday events coming up. Our website, which is www.thearcnw.org, has all of our information listed on there. So you can kind of keep up with what we have going on and that sort of thing.
Can you give that website address one more time for the person who is a little slow?
Yes, it is www.thearcnw for Northwest.org.
Thank you for sharing some of your background and a little bit more detail on what the ARC does. I'm somewhat familiar through my own personal experiences with a child with differences and relied on them and had really great support and experience in working with the organization. But I also was interested to learn, we've been talking a little bit before we were getting started today about some of the other things that the ARC also does in supporting families in the community, in helping their children get special education services put in place and feel that support. So it's really... we're so grateful you're able to join us today. So one of the things I thought might be a nice place to start in our conversation as we move into things, talking about communication. One of the things that we notice in our work at Call, where Antoinette and I work, is we sometimes the folks that are calling us, oftentimes they're a parent or a guardian, they're in crisis, and you sense with some that they have a pretty strong feelings about what they might expect or what's going to happen for their child if they are identified as a child needing special education services. That might be from their own experience growing up. Maybe the parent or guardian has differences and was getting support or should have got support and didn't. But nonetheless, they come to us and they have a lot of kind of preconceived notions about what that means. So I was wondering if you could speak about how you see stigma today as it relates to special education.
I think the more information that's out there, there is less stigma, but there still is. There's a considerable amount. And that can come either way. Sometimes a school or a school district is able to identify a suspected disability, and they may approach the family with it, and the family may not be in a position and willing to receive that information at that time. I think regarding stigma of any kind, the more information that is provided, the more you know, the less stigma there will be. I think that's just one of those things. The more information we put out there, the more education we provide, the less stigma there is. We can understand, we can empathize with people. Like you said, their backgrounds may provide something. Maybe they've experienced some things themselves. But what I have found is just the more information, even if it's not just coming from us, advocates as the ARC, providing them with other resources, that they can see that the more information they have, the less, nervous it makes them, or just not having that. Yeah, absolutely, because there are a lot of resources out there that will help individuals navigate this process.
Yeah, such a good point.
Yes, it is. Well, one of the things we see a lot when we have clients calling into the Counsel and Advocacy Law Line, they're confused as to whom to communicate with. If they're having issues or problems with services being put in place or problems with services not being put in place, they don't know who to talk to or where to go. So can you talk about who a family should be communicating with when they have concerns or issues about their child's special education plan?
Absolutely. We like to say to climb the ladder. So oftentimes, when the issue like that arises, we often say start with that immediate team of people. Sometimes it's a resource teacher, it could be a social worker. We oftentimes recommend that families find out who is the person to contact. We might call them a team lead, an IEP case, a case manager. It can be a different name, but really just identifying who is that person to contact when I do have a question. Oftentimes, people will say, I contacted the principal. Well, you may not get a response, especially right away from a principal on something like that. The biggest thing is to identify and just ask the question. Again, communicate. When I have a concern, I have a question, who on the team should I contact first? And then also find out what's the best means of communicating, of contacting. Is it a telephone call? Does the person prefer email? Sometimes it's a text message. And also find out what's the turnaround time expected to receive a response. Because we don't want someone making a call in the morning and then by the afternoon, now they're upset. And rightfully so, or understandably, but to kind of find out. So sometimes it does require, oftentimes, honestly, the family to kind of reach out and find out who's that contact person, and then just work their way up from there if they're not getting it.
So they essentially need to lay the groundwork for communication from the beginning so that they know, okay, who's the head of my child's IEP team, who's the point person that I start with if there's a concern, and understand that a lot of the times the point person may be a teacher or they may be the school psychologist, and they have duties that they're handling throughout the day. So you might not get a response in 15 minutes.
You make such a good point too, especially this time of year about the timing of when you're making a request. I would imagine that school districts get more questions maybe as the school year begins. So, expecting that turnaround to be as quick when school is just starting and there's a million things that are being ironed out with the start of school, that it's good to have that awareness that you just have to kind of consider the perspective and the experience that they're having on the other side of it when you're reaching out.
Absolutely, yeah. Just ask the question. And sometimes the team hasn't even necessarily thought of it yet. And then that requires them to kind of identify someone on the team. And it makes them accountable as well as when to provide a turnaround time to that. A week later is really not acceptable. But maybe to give 2 days, of a certain amount of time. So I think it's just about communicating that and asking the right questions.
So setting up a communication contract between the family and the team.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, you did mention the principal. We do hear a lot of times, I talk to the principal. What role, if any, does the principal play in special education services?
So I don't really want to say they just don't play a role, but a principal is ultimately over a whole building. They're over all of the staff in the building, and over all of the students, every single student in the building. We often recommend if there is an actual problem or really a concerning issue, and you're going to submit an email, CC the principal, just as a courtesy, just so they are aware of what's going on, that you've reached out to certain team members. Always have a minimum of 2 people on an email when communicating something. Again, if it's just a general question that you have, identify who the case manager is or the IEP team lead, and just ask them. If there's a problem, absolutely CC that principal. Try not to take it personally if you don't hear back from the principal. They are probably the furthest person away from having day-to-day activities or interaction with your child. However, if you are a parent or a family member and you feel like you want to request the presence of a principal, you have every right to do that. If you would like them to show up to a meeting or something like that. I just oftentimes tell families, try not to put too much weight on that, simply because, the principal has a lot of duties that don't necessarily involve your child. But it's definitely something you can ask if you really feel like it's necessary for them to be present.
Yeah, they're a part of the team, but not necessarily the single point of contact for the team.
Absolutely, yeah.
So on that line of thought there, we oftentimes are hearing from parents or guardians and talking to them about how to work through their issues with their child and get their needs met, in our work trying to understand what their legal rights are. But there's more than just that perspective. There's the other parts of the team, the student, the teacher, the support person, the parapro, the administrator. Can you talk a little bit about effective communication coming from those different perspectives?
Yes, so it kind of goes back, we often talk about this in our office, it kind of goes back to the foundation of how we all came up, we were raised. To be polite, respectful, treat others how you would like to be treated. We understand that this can be a daunting process. This is a journey. It's never, it's gonna go on. It's a harrowing time, it can be. And so oftentimes with families that contact us as advocates, I often tell them, you only have control over yourself. You cannot control someone else. We all have, we have subjective feelings. We feel like someone spoke to us a certain way. You're entitled to that. However, that's not the main issue. It's really about being able to kind of handle yourself in a certain situation, and you have rights. If you feel a certain way, you know yourself better than anyone else. If you feel yourself getting so angry and so upset, you have every right to request a break, to adjourn a meeting. I've been in meetings before where I, as the advocate, can kind of read someone's body language without them saying anything, and I can say, can we just take 2 minutes, step outside for a minute, that sort of thing. There's just a lot of ways to handle that, but everyone on the team, and you were absolutely right when you said that, the team is everyone. Sometimes people hear team and they think it's just the staff, when in fact the team is the family, the guardians, whomever they invite, which could be an advocate, medical professionals, and the student. Sometimes the student is never considered into the equation when they're the main reason we're there. So it's really about that. If you feel like something's overwhelming and you find yourself getting upset and can't handle it, you can always ask, may I step out for a sip of water? And that sort of thing. It's really, everyone should be handling themselves in an appropriate manner. But you can always ask for a break or something like that if you find yourself getting a little bit overwhelmed or emotional.
So it's okay to take, 5 minutes to center yourself and come back in a more calmer state to continue the meeting, or just to adjourn the meeting so that everybody has a time to decompress and center and regroup.
Absolutely. I'm an advocate for that as well, because like I said, sometimes I can look at someone and tell this is not going well. And and I think that's what's great about having a support person there, is to just kind of be able to read the room, and staff is always understanding of that completely, so I've never had an issue.
Right, and like you were pointing out earlier, there's a lot of things you help take out some of the mystery for them as an advocate and make it less scary for them. That I'm sure those 2-minute breaks can not only help you get centered, but give you maybe an opportunity to help people understand maybe kind of where things are at. Maybe they misunderstood something or were reacting to something that really wasn't going to be as problematic as they maybe were thinking.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, a lot of times we hear parents tell us, well, I called and spoke to the teacher. I called and spoke to the counselor. What form of communication would you suggest families use if they want more concrete evidence of the conversations that they've had?
So we always, if it's written down, that's a paper trail. So we always recommend that. However, I also understand that many opportunities happen where it's not that. So for instance, you're there picking up or dropping off your child. And oftentimes, honestly, a lot of verbal conversations take place. You're there passing off your child to a teacher or picking up your child, and maybe a staff, an aide, or someone says, your child had a bad day today, and we're considering changing their classroom or placing them somewhere else. This is just a normal thing that people do, right, every day. But with something like that, that can really escalate a situation, right? That's that sort of conversation. And that happens very often. It's very common. I would say in a moment like that, if you feel like you've kind of, it was just a shock to you, you weren't ready to respond, and maybe you did respond, I would always suggest that kind of retreat from that, go back, figure out what was just said, or even jot notes down, but always follow up with something in writing. It should always end with something in writing to the person maybe that said it. If you have their contact information, include someone else on it. That's when you absolutely want to include a principal, maybe CC. Go to the team lead, whoever. Reach out to that team and kind of say, even just to start it off, again, it goes with being kind of, providing courtesy. This is what happened today or yesterday at pickup. This is what was said to me. This is what I took from that. I could be wrong. Can someone, maybe we can meet about this. Can we set up a phone call or an informal meeting? Just something like that, because I think even if the person's intent, if they didn't have a bad intent, it's really about how that parent or the person received it. And if, again, that could be some miscommunication. I would say the best way to kind of avoid miscommunication is just following up in writing and then see what the response will be. And then that way, more than one person's eyes have seen that email, and then someone will respond accordingly to it.
That's great. Thinking about some of the different things that I experienced as a parent, noticing how things evolved in your relationship with the school, for your child, your relationship with the school district and the teachers as a parent. Can you talk a little bit about how the communication process might evolve and change from the point of initially identifying that your child needs some kind of extra support to going through the evaluation process, and then you get that 504 plan or the IEP plan in place, and you might think you're done as a parent, like you're good to go, but we know now, with having gotten to the other side of that that's not quite how that works, and there's this ongoing process of working with your child's team. So can you talk a little bit about how that communication might evolve over time?
Sure. I think that the more time you spend in it, it gets easier. Initially, it is very daunting. It can be a difficult thing because you just don't know what you don't know. And it's so overwhelming. And a lot of the time at the beginning, when students are like newly receiving special education services and supports, or even in that evaluation process, many times those are students who just received a new diagnosis as well. So you have the medical side and then you have the educational side. And you become consumed with the medical side, which can look very different than what's going on in the school.
Yeah.
So you do have to understand that, and I feel like parents, we encourage you to be open to that, because now what you're learning medically can look so different in the school system, and there is a process, and there are laws, and there are regulations that need to be followed. And so we don't want families to have this kind of guard up. We want you to be open to receiving what information is being told to you. And always you have so many other resources to follow up on that. You don't have to just take what someone at the school is saying. And it's nothing against the schools, of course, but if you feel anything, you have other resources where you can kind of reach out and follow through on that. There's so much information online available. You have advocates, you have parent mentors, you have, attorneys that you can call just to ask questions about something like that. So I would say initially it can start off a little rocky, not for everyone, of course, but to not be discouraged by that. It gets better. The more you do it, the more you realize. And it's going to change, right? Every year. As soon as you feel like you have a handle on it, of course. And so that's another thing. But as you learn how it goes, then you get more comfortable with it. The communication, you just know what to do going forward. But I often say, please be open to receiving the information, because it's a time. You're just learning something new, and you learn as you go along. There's no way to really set you up for that. You kind of, just have to. It's trial and error. So
that's such a good point too about the timing of the medical diagnosis too. And that's a big thing to take in as a parent, as a child, and then to be on top of it going through this.
And honestly, it changes your life. It changes everyone in your family's life. Yeah. And that's a lot to deal with. And then now you have the school aspect there. It's a whole different machine. And you have to go along, not go along with it, meaning you just have to accept anything, but you have to go along with that process of school. And school is a very important process, because it is setting our children up for what's to come after. It's a lot when you're in it, but it really is a catalyst to how you're going to handle things after. Once they hit 18, no matter where your child is, wherever they show up, whatever their ability is, when they're 18, they are 18. So they're becoming an adult, and things can look very different at that point. So you're really learning how things go during that schooling process, and it will help you as you get along and as your children get older.
Yeah, I remember being very overwhelmed when I first found out that my son needed special education services at the age of 4. But as we went through his education, things kept changing.
Yeah.
And it's like I had to learn to be okay with change, because he started out with an IEP for one reason, and by the time he graduated from high school, we had all sorts of different new diagnoses that came along the way.
Absolutely. And they're people. They change. We change. We just naturally grow. I think sometimes we focus so much on that disability. We forget sometimes that they are just normal humans. Little people who grow and get bigger and are going through normal, natural things. So like you said, you're right. It forces you to be flexible and know that just as they change, something at the school can change, and their supports and services may change, and things can look different than it started out.
Yeah, I think too, one thing I didn't, in the beginning, and I feel like my personal experience was pretty good. Like our school district was working, they wasn't like totally objecting to everything, and we were working together, seeming, mostly towards a common goal. But in the beginning, when it felt a little bit more kind of like their side and our side, as time went on, we learn to trust one another and realize like you said, we changed, we learned new things, and we became, kind of on the same page with things, more allies for the child than, the school and the family. So.
Developing trust is a huge thing for both sides, honestly. I've seen it with staff, and I've seen it with families as well. And that's important, because I think that kind of dictates how that process and that relationship develops.
Okay. And speaking of trust, we know, having gone through it, that special education is a long process, and conflict is inevitable. Sometimes we have parents call and they're having a conflict with the school about their child's services, and they're at an impasse. And some parents go way to the right and do too much about it, and some parents go way to the left and don't do anything because they're not really sure what to do. So can you talk to what families should do if they come to an impasse with the school and school staff regarding the services and supports that are being provided for their child?
Sure. So you don't want to sit and do nothing, and as simple as that sounds, it's very common. And I think just from experiences I've had with parents, sometimes I've heard parents say things like, "Well, I don't have to say anything because they should know." And no, they don't necessarily know. We're all human. And you have to speak up. That's part of being yes, I'm an advocate, but you are the first advocate for your child. And what's happening is during this process, you are teaching them and showing them how to advocate for themselves. That is really the ultimate goal. As they get older, it does not matter their ability. We are showing them by example, teaching them how to advocate for themselves. And that is not a way to advocate by not saying anything. And I understand people have their personal feelings, and you think, well, these are the teachers, they're the staff, they should know. Not necessarily. They don't always know what your expectation is, what you're thinking, what you know or don't know. So I would say anytime you come to a situation like that, again, reach out, speak up, whatever it is. It doesn't have to necessarily go to a complaint right away. It doesn't necessarily have to go to that. You kind of want to climb the ladder. You can have informal meetings and things like that. Again, reach out to a parent mentor. Reach out to an advocate and just ask, this is what I'm feeling and this is what I've experienced. What do you suggest that we do? A lot of times as advocates, we can kind of, go through a situation and say, oh, that's sort of an easy fix. Let's put something together, write something up and send this email. Again, part of what we do as advocates, we're absolutely there to support families, but a part of that process is showing them how to do that. If we're not, there's times where we're not able to show up to everything. I would love to empower families to know, okay, I've come to this situation, a roadblock, I'm having difficulty. What do I do? Okay, let me start with this. I'm going to write. And then let's see what the response is back. And then if I'm still not getting anywhere, you do have other options. We also partner with SIMS, which is Special Education Mediation Services. If you ever get to a situation where you feel like there's too much tension, and this is common, miscommunication, it's gotten to a point of yelling, screaming, just complete, disarray. You do have mediators and facilitators free of charge that will come to meetings, and they are unbiased. They are there as exactly that, as a mediator, to facilitate, to make sure they're clocking the time, to make sure everyone's staying on track with what's the topic that we're there to discuss, because oftentimes in the meetings, they go off the rail. It becomes personal. Well, you said this, I didn't like when you said that, and no, you stormed out and you didn't speak, and it becomes very personal. A mediator will keep things, let's get back to the point, they're there unbiased. As an advocate, I'm there representing the student and the family. Although sometimes I'm being a little bit of a mediator, just to keep things down, but I'm really there to support the family and the student. So you do have those options as well if things get too tough and you find that I just can't meet alone with the staff. And staff, they're all familiar with mediation services. So they know once you reach out, the mediation services will reach out to the school and say, I will be, a part of this next meeting and that. So
Okay.
there's ways around it.
I think think it's very important for parents to know that there is a free mediation service out there for them, because a lot of times you say mediation and people think, oh, I can't afford that. That's going to cost me money.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so when they don't agree with the evaluation results or the eligibility category that their child is receiving services under, what steps can the parents or family take?
So a family can request what we call an IEE. So many acronyms in special education, I know. But an IEE is an independent educational evaluation. And if you do not agree with your students, like the results of the eligibility, the category, and you just feel like you would like an additional evaluation, the school district will provide that evaluation free of charge once you put the request in. And you typically will give a reason. With the evaluation, the school does not, they need to take that into consideration, whatever the results are, but they do not have to adapt whatever the results are. They do need to take it into consideration. So they're going to come in, that evaluator will come in, do their own evaluation, provide a report, because we know that so much of what special education is about, lots of paperwork, lots of data. And then everyone will come back together and kind of go over that data, just as they did with an initial evaluation. I do want to say, however, with that, oftentimes families are not familiar with the fact that school eligibility in the category can differ from what the medical diagnosis is. So it's not saying that your child does not have this specific medical diagnosis. It's saying that once they've done a full evaluation, what shows up during the school day, whatever is showing up in the school day under that category is what that eligibility
What's
is.
impacting their education.
Absolutely. So I think it's important to note that just so that families are aware, if that is the case, again, you still have a right to request that additional evaluation. So even with that, but understand, say they come back and the same eligibility is the same, it doesn't change. Always make sure that whatever those medical diagnoses are listed in that IEP. That's very important. I was a part of a meeting yesterday where there was an IEP that showed no medical information, and that's not right. And that can become a problem, which it did in this particular instance later. So those are the type of things to understand. Again, that's one of those things that you're not going to know until you know it. Why would you even think that? My child has autism, of course. That paperwork should say autism. It doesn't always.
And that paperwork is extensive and sometimes intimidating.
It is. Mm-hmm. But it's important to know what is on that documentation. A lot of families do not read the paperwork at all, and that is imperative.
That's one of the things I always say. Read your child's IEP from year to year, because it changes every year, and you need to know what that IEP says and what the diagnoses are in the IEP and what services the child is receiving and the accommodations based on the child's needs. I didn't always nitpick over what eligibility category my son was in. His changed 3-4 times during his career because I read his IEP and I knew that all his diagnoses were in there. And each time we got a new diagnosis, I made sure it was put in the IEP. It's like, oh, well, wait, he was diagnosed with dyslexia. That needs to be put in the IEP.
And it's important. That's one of the takeaways from this. If anyone takes something away, read everything that is given to you. It's very important. It is overwhelming. You're right. It is very difficult. It can be difficult. I often tell parents, and this is something I did, it just comes from personal experience. I had 2 IEPs for my son, 20, 30 pages. I would read 2-3 pages a day, take a break, maybe take a day off, go back. And because it is a lot, it's overwhelming, and you don't always understand everything. I was always looking up, okay, well, what is an IE? What is this? What is that? During the process, but you do need to know, because I will tell you that will cut back a lot of the stress that you have. If you're thinking, how come my son isn't receiving this? How come my daughter isn't receiving this? We talked about it in the meeting. They're not. If you go to that IEP and it's not in there, that's why.
Yeah.
If it's not in there, it does not exist.
Yeah.
And you need to know why. Maybe we did have a discussion about it in the meeting, but it was also determined that your child was not eligible for that specific support or service. So you have to know. And if you are a parent yourself that may have a deficit, or maybe you have challenges yourself with difficulty with reading and understanding, please let someone know that can help you with that, because there are people that can sit with you and kind of go through it. It's a lot, but it's something you need to know of what's in that paperwork, and anything that they give, whether it's progress reports, report cards, any notes from a teacher. Those are things that you need to know. It just helps you understand and advocate for them more.
And one of the things I was fortunate in this regard that our school district, I remember really well when we first were going through this process, they actually, when we did the IEP, would take the time to kind of explain each section as we went, which I really loved. I mean, I became more knowledgeable about this as I went, and as an attorney, educated myself as time went on. But if there's any educators out there listening, school administrators, that's a wonderful thing I think you can do to kind of help your families and collaborate in the process with them to help summarize it, because the folks that are writing those IEPs on the school district side have had a lot of training and how to do that and understand them really well. So maybe that's something they can do to help bridge that communication gap.
I agree. It's very important.
So one just last quick question while I'm here, and we're going to move into kind of a bigger picture communication conversation. You know, sometimes we get calls at our organization from folks who are, you know, they're in crisis mode and they want to take things to the mat and they want to file a complaint. How do you feel about that?
So they have a right. We always let families know that is a right that they have. Oftentimes what I will do is we kind of try to figure out if there's a way to resolve something before getting to that. Because it's just, as I was saying, that's a part of climbing the ladder, but it's also the highest part. The further up you are, the further away that person who's making a decision is from dealing with your child day to day. Again, you still have a right. If a school or someone in the district is out of compliance with something, they're not following the IEP, you absolutely should. And honestly, with complaints that make it to the state of the Department of Education, that's the only way they're going to know when something is not working properly, right? But also there are ways to get to resolution before you get to that, because that is a long process. And it's time consuming. You know, it can turn out to be several months. You do have up to a year to do it, from the time of the incident or the initial problem or that you may have had. But you absolutely do. You can go to the Michigan Department of Education Office of Special Education website and see. Even just going through sort of the document in the form, reading through it will kind of let you know. It gives you an idea if maybe the school is out of compliance or something like that. But we absolutely tell families about that. You know, there's due process, there's filing a state complaint. But then there's also, have you gone through the steps before it gets to that point? Because, you know, if it's an immediate concern or issue, we really do need to tackle that at the time and going through the process.
At the local level.
Yes, absolutely. But it's absolutely a family, a right that a family has.
Okay. And can you speak to why effective communication is so important when dealing with special education?
It's the only way you're going to really get somewhere. Honestly, I've been a part of meetings and things where people are kind of focused on other things, and then it's like, well, we've been in this meeting for 2 hours, we have to adjourn, meet again. There's just a way to do things, and we expect it from everyone at the table, the staff as well as, you know, the family. It's just important. It's important to be respectful, to be courteous, but also to get to the point. I tell families a lot of times, if you're sending an email, stick straight to the facts. If it's bullet points, numbers, number it. Just keep to it. Try not to veer off into personal things or what happened 5 years ago. And I understand if you feel like it ties into today, but just try to stick to the facts. Keep it less muddy. You know, if you want someone else to review it before you send it, please have someone do that. Because again, you can write something, yes, in the heat of the moment, and it's not appropriate to send, and it's further away. Always have someone review something. And or if you write something and you're writing it in the heat of the moment, step away. Come back when you're calmer and see, does it sound, does it sound okay? You can always have somebody review it. I've reviewed plenty of emails and things, and I might say, a person is entitled to their feeling, but I might say, well, you may want to take out that word and not call them a name and stick to the facts, just because once you do that, now the person reading it is a little distracted and it's gotten away from.
They're just hearing what you just called them.
Absolutely, and that is very common. So that's something that I, often tell people about effective communication.
So as we wind down here, wondered if you could share with us a little bit. I think it might be interesting for our audience to hear what it's like for you as an advocate when you go into a school district. How are you received? Is there a typical reaction that you get? And does that change? Okay.
So it's mixed. It's a mixed reaction. And I think for those districts that maybe are not used to having advocates come, you don't know. An advocate almost sounds like a lawyer coming. So people get a little anxious and they just don't know. And in all honesty, each advocate has their own style as well. My demeanor is pretty much, as it is right now. But I think if everyone is there truly for the right purpose, that family has a right to have an advocate there. And the family also has a right to have anyone there. You can have anyone come to a meeting if you want. If no one else is available and your neighbor can come. And I often suggest that when you go to a meeting, always have someone there, another person that can listen, because you're not always taking in every single thing. I'm huge on note taking if you can, if you're able to write and kind of listen at the same time so you don't feel like you miss anything important. But I normally see if people don't seem that happy to see an advocate coming in, within several minutes of the conversation going, I can see people tend to relax. But when it's all said and done, my point there is to kind of figure out what's happening and let's get to the bottom of it. But always know there are parents and families who feel nervous. They feel like they don't want to cause any tension between them and the school by inviting an advocate. And I always reassure them. Please let them know. You know that you have a right to do it, and they know as well that you have a right to have someone there. And sometimes it is just having a reasonable person there to take in.
Yeah, I was just going to say that maybe the school district is glad to have someone kind of be who has the experience and knowledge of what this process is like, advocating for the child as well, because they are able to kind of move through it a little bit more easily.
And we oftentimes have schools that contact us and say, we're having difficulty with communicating. Would you all be willing to come in and, with the consent of the parent? And of course, we have no problem with that. And I appreciate that as well, because ultimately it is a partnership. It is a team. And if you feel like you're not getting any leeway, if someone feels like they have an advocate coming on their behalf, then it works for everyone involved. Like you said, there's someone reasonable there that can listen and kind of navigate through what's being said. It's a lot. And if you think about it, that it's every year. Legally, you're holding a meeting every year, at minimum. So, you always want to make sure that you feel comfortable and confident. Don't ever feel intimidated, by that, or feel nervous I would like someone there, but I'm afraid to. No, it's a lot. I did it many years alone, not knowing at that time. And just to have someone else there who could be a soundboard for me, or just take notes if I'm not able to take notes. That's important, because you need to know what's being said about your child in those meetings. And your input is equally as important.
You got everybody all at once at the table, so it's an important day.
Absolutely, yeah. You need to come prepared, I think. Come prepared with what you want to say, because that is a huge part of having those meetings. Parent input, guardian input is just as important. And when you're in the moment, you may not remember what needs to be said. So.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
I think most school districts would be happier to see an advocate come in with a parent than to see an attorney. We should actually be your last resort.
Yeah, that's true.
Call us when you need legal advice and information, but taking an advocate into a meeting with you is your right, and it doesn't raise tension as high as having an attorney in the meeting with you. So there are probably a lot of parents out there wondering, how do we get connected to your organization if I am in your service area?
Yeah, so if you're in our service area, you can call our number. Our phone number is 313-532-7915, and you can ask for an advocate. There's two of us there. My director is an advocate as well. Or you can go to our website. Again, that is www.thearc, which is THEARCNW for Northwest.org. And there's information on there as well as, our information, our phone numbers, our contact information is on there. And then there you can also see everything else that we provide. We have a wonderful toy lending library for those that are 12 and under, for the younger community. And then we have a LECA program. There's just a lot of things to offer at our agency, and we're really proud of that. And then in the community partnerships and all of that. And we're happy to be here with you all today.
And one final question. If parents are outside of your service area but want to get connected to an advocate with the ARC, how can those parents find someone in their area?
So we really recommend that they reach out to Michigan Alliance for Families First for a parent mentor, because every situation doesn't necessarily require an advocate. So we let them kind of take in much of the information and kind of, figure out what the issues are. And then from there, they will reach out to an advocate and send a referral out. But in case you do just happen to call an advocate, there is an advocate in every area that, for any school district there is. So it may not fall in our catchment area, but there is an ARC advocacy agency.
And Michigan Alliance for Families is statewide as well.
They are statewide, yeah. So there are parent mentors that cover every school district, and you can get a lot of the same information. The difference is parent mentors don't attend meetings, so they can't attend meetings. The advocates do. So they kind of do the intake, and then reach out to advocates and give a referral.
Okay. And is there any event coming up that you would like to let the community know about?
Offhand, we do have a couple of, we have a Halloween event. We always have a Christmas event as well. So that information, I can't think of the dates offhand, but if you go to our website, that information is on our website as well.
Thank you so much for being here with us today and having this conversation. I think people have learned a lot. And one of the key takeaways is communication is important, and effective communication is absolutely necessary.
Thank you both for having me. I appreciate it being here with you today.
It's been great.
Thank you, Susan, Antoinette, and Kalila. That was really, really valuable information. There is some really great comments in the chat. So I was going to shout some things out, but we're running short on time. So make sure you check that out, because this has been a really great conversation. I have an offline question that I'd like to ask. I know we're short on time, but I think that this is an important one, and that is, you touched upon having the student involved as part of the team. At what level do you suggest that involvement? And is there a certain age, or does it just really depend on the child?
So by law, the law says that they should be invited to attend meetings at 16. But even at the middle school age, we often, depending on the student's involvement and their level of communication, because some students are very vocal about, their education and how school is going for them. So if we feel like they're even younger than that, maybe would like to come, some say they would like to come to the meetings, we offer that. At 16, they must be offered that. We always make sure we will ask families about that. Has the school reached out and said your child can come? And really, the student has the decision to say yes if they're able to, no. Usually, we try to encourage them to come, even if it's just for a few minutes. Is there anything you would like to say? Because they are the main part of the team. So we want to make sure their voice is heard. So that is kind of how that goes. So it can be a little bit younger. We've seen as young as 5th grade come to a meeting.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that. Again, be sure you check out the comments in the chat because you've gotten a lot of great shout outs here this afternoon. Thank you, all three of you, for your time and this valuable information. And I think that's a wrap for part 3 of Education Advocacy. Thank you and have a great afternoon, everyone.